Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the virtual program today, Nonprofit Management and Fundraising in Times of Uncertainty and Upheaval with Dave Paule. I am Brittany Spillman and I serve as the Carey Center Director of Community and Collegiate Programs. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank this year's sponsors. This virtual program's presenting sponsor is the Walker Area Community Foundation. The Walker Area Community Foundation is a nonprofit grant-making organization building the permanent capital needed to daily facilitate community conversations, inspire action, and empower partners. This year's Community and Collegiate Program sponsors have pledged to support our efforts in providing meaningful programming for the nonprofit sector. Thank you to Auburn University Outreach, the East Alabama Community Foundation, the River Region United Way, Auburn University Outreach Office of Public Service, Social U, the Drummond Thorne Stooks Fund for Excellence, and a community service grant made possible by State Senator Randy Price and State Representative Joe Lovern. Dave Paule is an experienced chief executive officer, fundraiser, marketer, writer, and educator with a track record of accomplishments in strategic planning, marketing communications, product development, branding, e-commerce, and project management. He specializes in jump-starting stagnant operations, global business turnarounds, and building greenfield organizations. He joined our fundraising search as a senior consultant in 2020 and became a principal and managing partner in 2023. Please join me in welcoming Dave Paule as he shares about nonprofit management and fundraising in times of uncertainty and upheaval.
Thanks, Brittany, and thank you all for having me here. Julie, thank you for the applause. It looked like you were having a heck of a good time before we started the meeting. First of all, I want to thank you all for allowing me to be here. This is the third time that I personally have spoken with in a Carey Center program, and I think, oh gosh, probably the 10th or 15th time someone from our company has. Our fundraising search really values that the work that the Carey Center does. I am going to pull up the presentation so I can share the screen. Give me 1 second. And I'm working off of a single monitor today. So, Brittany, if you see anything in the comments that you think I should stop and immediately address, please don't hesitate to stop me. So what we're going to do today is talk about navigating the playing field right now. This is a volatile time for nonprofits. I'm not telling you anything you all don't know. Our conversation today, we want to talk about fundraising in the U.S. by the numbers and take that and actually build into a current state assessment for how a lot of the upheaval that is existing in the country actually impacts our nonprofits. Because I run a fundraising company, we spend a lot of time talking to funders. I'm going to tell you what we are hearing from funders. For those of you who are in capital campaign, I'm going to give you the guidance that we are giving all of our clients. Then we're going to shift gears, talk a little bit about revenue diversification strategies, because candidly, probably 50% of all the nonprofits that we deal with are not adequately diversified in their fundraising, especially for the environment we find ourselves in right now. And then we'll finish up talking a little bit about leadership in times of turbulence. In the deck, I'm going to send to Brittany to send out to all of you. I'm also including an appendix on contingency planning. I'm going to reference it in our discussion. I don't think we're going to have time to go through it today, but I think it'll be a good, useful research, especially for those of you who are executive directors managing through the environment we're in right now. Bit about me. I am on Act 3 of my career. I spent 25 years of my career in commercial aviation, most of that at Delta, where, among other things, I played a pretty significant role in corporate philanthropy. I retired from Delta in 2011 and started running nonprofits because I thought it was going to be easier. I spent 10 years running nonprofits, mostly as executive director. And then in 2020, I decided to retire again, and I thought I was going to just teach a little as an adjunct at Georgia State University and consult a little. Instead, Georgia State asked me to become a full-time faculty member right at the same time that I decided to buy our fundraising search. So I am the only person in the world dumb enough to retire into two full-time careers. Our company, our fundraising search, is really dedicated to helping nonprofits better fund their missions. We do that first through helping nonprofits hire the right people at either the fundraising department, the executive level, anyone who touches revenue, but then more importantly, helping them build and implement better strategies and leverage best practices across the field. We have we've worked with over 200 nonprofits, helping them build better, more robust fundraising strategies. Let me start with everything I'm going to tell you today. First of all, the S&P is extraordinarily volatile right now. I give a presentation, this presentation or a similar presentation every 2 weeks. At least I have been for the last couple of months, and every 2 weeks I have to completely rewrite the slides because the market is so unpredictable. The unpredictability in the market is going to continue, which is going to impact both individual and institutional funders. The second is the budget package working its way through Washington right now has a number of provisions which is going to have strong negative financial implications, in particular for corporate and foundation funders. The third message is our advice to all of our clients and to all of you is to plan for multi-year financial turbulence. So tied to that, for those of you who are executive directors, don't sign up for stretch fundraising goals. We're going to talk about approaching funders and what funders are experiencing, but we are hearing from funders and elected officials that they don't want to talk to individual nonprofits, that fundraising in coalitions is more effective right now. And the sixth thing, which I think is really important, when we think about philanthropic giving, it's important to remember philanthropic giving is a leisure spend activity. Donors don't prioritize giving over their personal financial priorities, and this is most significantly felt in times like this. Basically times borderline on walking right up to the line of chaos. So let's start with fundraising by the numbers. For those of you who have never heard or seen me present before, I always like to talk about make sure that we're all level set where funding is coming from and where it's going to. Giving USA is a report that is issued every June on how fundraising has looked in the previous year. It's based on a snapshot. This is last year's data. Giving USA for 2025 will be released in 2 weeks on June 24th, which means I have to go update about 15 presentations. Individual giving in the United States comes in right at about 67%. It usually runs anywhere from 67 to 72%. This is giving by individual donors to organizations. It includes both major giving and regular annual fund direct contributions to an organization. Generally speaking, for most nonprofits, it is the most stable form of fundraising. And we usually recommend that for most of our clients, they have a target of between 65 and 75% of revenue coming from individual giving. Foundation giving is at 19% in the United States. That was higher last year than it had been in previous years. That's not because foundations started giving more, it's because individuals gave less. Foundation giving is some of the most difficult money for a nonprofit to get, second only to corporate funding. Corporate funding comes in at 7%. Having been a former executive director, for those of you who have board members who will tell you things like companies have rooms full of money that they're just waiting for nonprofits to come ask for, they don't. Corporate fundraising is basically a form of advertising, and then bequests come in at 8%. little bit higher than it had been in previous years. I think it's good for boards to know. I don't let our clients actually budget bequests because the development director and the executive director can't go out and actually kill people to collect on them. You can see where that money is going. The largest sector is money going to religions. That has been the largest sector historically ever since Giving USA started gathering data in, I think, 1983. It has also consistently been shrinking since that time. It has fallen from its highest was 50% at the start of Giving USA. Uh, it is now down to 24%. There is no reason to expect that it's not going to continue going forward. I think this is useful data for boards to look at. I'm using the example of Health and Human Services because many organizations look at themselves too narrowly. So, one of the areas that that our fundraising search works with is free and charitable clinics. They have a tendency to only look at health giving, which is 9%. However, many of their programs also qualify as human services giving. So I tell them you're not competing for 9% of the pie, you're competing for 23% of the fundraising pie. This chart is going to be most germane to what we're going to talk about today. Philanthropy in the United States, as we said, is a form of leisure spend. It also closely tracks to the performance of the S&P 500 index. 3 weeks ago, when I gave this presentation, the S&P was down 19%. It's now approaching its record high. It's falling again today. S&P 500 has an almost immediate impact on individual giving. It also has a strong year-over-year impact on foundational giving. So 2024 had some of the best S&P performance ever. Most foundations set their budgets based on how their investments performed in 2024. So foundation giving in 2024 is not going to be as negatively impacted as it might be in 2025 because of the volatility in the market. Individual giving, on the other hand, immediately goes down when the S&P 500 goes down. And individual giving will go down and will stay down until the market stabilizes. So in a time of volatility like we see right now, individual giving is going to be down. It can sometimes take as long as 14 months after the market stabilizes for giving to recover to the levels it was at previously. That's going to be important as we talk about fundraising strategies. Many organizations are going through, organizations that have a July 1 fiscal year are going through budgeting right now. We provide financial guidance to all of our clients, and we view all of you as clients or potential clients because of our close relationship with the Carey Center. In planning budgets, CPIU, which is the Consumer Price Index for urban areas, rose 2.8% in the last 12 months, and it's forecast to rise 2.9% in the next 12 months. Current projections for inflation for the next 3 years are at 3%. Because medical costs have outpaced CPI by 2%, we're actually recommending that all of our client organizations and all nonprofits should forecast costs that will increase by 3% to 3.2% for the next 3 years. That means as you're budgeting for the next 3 years, you have to budget a minimum increase of your earned and contributed revenue of at least 3.2% just to maintain status quo of where you're at currently. So with that happy news, let's talk about what we're hearing from funders. So as I said, since the end of 2025, the S&P has declined to roughly 19% before rebounding. It was near a high yesterday. It's down at the moment. This was a significant drop, especially compared to the rally at the end of 2024. The NASDAQ and the Dow have also seen considerable losses, but the S&P is the best predictor of what individual giving is going to do. As I said, this will impact both individual givers and institutional funders. Individual givers are already pulling back on contributions over fears of recession. Foundations, most of the foundations we talk to have no plans to change their levels of giving in 2024. But you'll see in a second, they are making noise about changing how they give. But they also are looking at more cautious budgets initially for 2025 based on their concerns over how their investments are performing, which determines how much they have to give away. Cuts to the federal government are pushing more and more nonprofits into the funding spaces of other nonprofits. For example, the cuts to Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services has been ordered to cut 35% from its budget. Many healthcare organizations and health and research organizations are losing federal funding and are now going to funders who historically they did not touch. In fact, I speak to a lot of organizations that banked on always having federal grants that are now trying to have to figure out how to build development departments and fundraising activities on the fly. Many of them, the first wave of attack is facing foundations. I've spoken to about 20 foundations since the start of the year. All of them are seeing increased queries from organizations that did not traditionally approach them. The three things that we are hearing from foundations is many of them are contemplating increasing their sit-out periods next year, which means, foundation currently requires you to sit out a year after you got a grant. Many of them are contemplating extending those periods to 2 years or 3 years. Several other foundations, especially the major foundations in the Southeast, are looking at moving to invitation only because of the amount of queries and requests that they're getting. And we've been hearing from foundations for the better part of 10 years that they want to see more coalition and consolidations coming from nonprofits. As a friend of mine at a major foundation here says, while I would never say that there are too many nonprofits, there are, in fact, too few well-run nonprofits. And we do believe consolidation is an important part of a nonprofit strategy. Most nonprofits have not heard that, but the foundations we have talked to are quietly saying they're going to get more serious about putting money towards organizations that fundraise together or try to come together, as opposed to new and startup foundations. With corporate funding, philanthropic funding, as I said, is mostly a form of advertising. It is covered with multi-year contracts. The corporate foundations and corporations that I've spoken to have all said the same thing. They're going to honor the contracts that they have currently, but most of them are not looking for new funding vehicles in the near future because of the uncertainty in the marketplace. So how is that changing the competitive landscape for fundraising? So our company is headquartered in Georgia. That's where a large share of our clients are. Georgia has a ridiculous number of nonprofits. We are second only to California and Texas in the number of nonprofits per capita. There is one nonprofit for, I think, every 420 Georgians. Alabama is not as bad as Georgia, but there are still 38,374 nonprofit organizations in Alabama. That includes more than 12,000 501c3 public charities, 1,062 private and public foundations, and then 5,000 other 501c nonprofit organizations. I think it's worth knowing because many state governments don't realize exactly how big a business nonprofit is in states. Within the state of Alabama, nonprofits employ almost 600,000 people. They generate over 99 billion in revenue annually, and they have assets of 245 billion. So nonprofit is a big and valuable business sector in Alabama. We bring this down to the message your boards need to hear. Your funding competition is much, much, much heavier than it was before. Organizations that historically relied on federal funding, like federally qualified healthcare centers, universities, medical schools, international aid organizations, human services organizations, are all feeling the pinch, and they are all scrambling to address it. As I said, the first wave of fundraising is focused on institutional funders, namely companies and philanthropic foundations. But many of them are also realizing they have to build more diversified fundraising organizations, and they're scrambling to do so on the fly. For a nonprofit, especially a nonprofit that has not been dependent upon government funding, the temptation might be to say, well, we never had government funding anyhow. We will be fine. Do not allow yourself that level of comfort. Competition is coming for your funders. You need to operate from a perspective that you are forewarned and try to be progressive in how you address the fundraising landscape going forward. Last bit of guidance that I will provide for you is capital campaign guidance. One of the services our company provides is we our capital campaign consultants. We give guidance to all of our clients. I'm going to share this guidance with you also. If you have a capital campaign underway and it's advanced capital campaign, in other words, that you are in the public phase, don't back off. You will most likely achieve your goal. With the market as volatile as it is, you should not expect to exceed your goal. Therefore, this is not a time to accept cost overages or increases in project scope or budget. If you're just starting to think about a campaign right now, our advice is to go forward with a feasibility study. The reason for that is a feasibility study conducted right now is going to give you the most conservative picture of what a capital campaign can raise. The ones we are most concerned for are campaigns that are in the silent phase, especially if their feasibility study was completed between January of 2025. My best math says your campaign target is probably overstated by 10%, and in some cases maybe as high as 20%. So now the good news is if you're in the silent phase, it gives you time to rethink the scope of your project. The bad news is you've been working towards a number, and your board has heard a number that's probably 10 to 20% higher than what you can raise in this market over the next 3 years. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And before we go into advice I have on diversification, does anyone have any questions or comments on any of the data I've shown you so far? I realize that's not the cheeriest part of the presentation.
Debbie says that this has been grim but fascinating. Everyone, you're
Thank
welcome
you.
to put your questions or comments in the chat box, and I'm happy to share them. You're also welcome to unmute and talk to Dave.
Debbie, I will say, yes, it is grim, but first of all, I did not grow up in the South, so I believe in giving candid feedback because, in my world, bless your heart does not contain as much feedback as other people think it does. But more importantly, my goal is for you to have these facts so you can manage the expectations of your boards of directors. Sharon, for your question on 2024 information, it's the information that they published in 2024 that looked back over the previous 12 months. So it had both data from 2023 and 2024. The way IUPI and the Lilly Foundation can compile Giving USA is because it's a continuous rolling average They have to take a snapshot every year. And so I think they take the snapshot at the end of the first quarter of the year to say, okay, this is what it would look like at this point, and then they provide the data. So for any one specific year, it's more directionally correct. I think it's the intelligence that we pull away and the trends that we see over multiple years that are much more useful. Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. Oh, sorry. Excellent. The New Giving USA will project will represent 24. The projections for planning would be for 2025. Yes, that's correct. Let's go ahead and let's actually talk about some things which are a little more cheery, which is strategies for addressing this. So, a couple of you were on camera earlier, and as we said that, I think many nonprofits are not adequately diversified in terms of their fundraising strategy. Each nonprofit has a unique situation. So we're going to talk about each donor group, some of their giving motivations, and some of the trends that we're witnessing and advice that we're giving to clients. So let's start with individual donors because ideally they would be the biggest part of any nonprofit's giving pool. The giving motivation for these donors is they give because they have a relationship with the organization and its mission. Statistically, if you look at data, the number one reason that individual donors stop giving is not because they've been stolen by another funder. That's actually, well, I'll talk about that in a second. The number one reason they stopped giving is because they were not thanked. And second, they stopped giving because they think the organization does not need them, in particular because they were not adequately stewarded by the organization. There is a misnomer. There's two misnomers that I find with boards. First off, that you can steal another nonprofit's donors. That's rarely the case. You may be able to convince another nonprofit's donors to also support your mission. But whether or not a donor continues to support a nonprofit or leaves a nonprofit is largely a function of how well that nonprofit stewards and cultivates that donor long term. The cultivation strategy for these donors is essentially relationship sales. The fundraising team needs to build and maintain an ongoing relationship with these donors over the long period of time. For organizations who are just getting into this, especially the organizations that have lost federal funding and are now jumping in to try to build fundraising departments on the fly, this strategy, this fundraising strategy, requires you to play the long game. From the time a donor is first introduced to an organization, it can take 12 to 18 months of effective cultivation before you can expect the first gift. And if an organization is targeting a donor for a major gift, likewise, it can take 12 to 18 months of cultivation before they can expect the first major gift. The important thing to understand about that is if it takes 12 to 18 months, it always takes 12 to 18 months no matter when you start it. So the best time to start fundraising and cultivating donors was actually 18 months ago. The second best time is right now. Our goal for these donors is recurrent, unrestricted gifts. The size of the gift is less important than the frequency of the gift. We can have donors giving to us on an ongoing basis. Those donors are much more likely to stick with us through thick and thin as a reliable donor fundraising stream. I think one of the best examples of this that we see in many communities are NPR and PBS stations. Membership campaigns have always focused on the recurrence factor. And so many large market PBS stations, only 10% of their funding comes from federal levels. Most of it comes from local communities. The difficulty of this campaign is moderate. Something in particular that we are discussing with our clients is expanding your focus and fundraising to millennials and Gen Z. For the 5 years that I've been in consulting, I have been talking about this, and many organizations wrongly believe that millennials and Gen Z have no money. The first thing I would tell you before we talk about the amount of money they have is personal preferences, whether you like sushi, whether you like a specific brand of cologne or a specific type of car or a specific nonprofit's mission. Individuals form their personal preferences, things like that, between the ages of 16 and 26. One of the jobs I had was I was once the chief revenue officer of the Atlanta Opera. And I had a board member, not a particularly diplomatic board member, who yelled at me in a couple of board meetings saying, there's a retirement home named Limbrook in Buckhead that's full of old, wealthy old people. You need to go over and convince those 78 and 80-year-old people with money that they like opera. And I'm like, let's be really clear. Those people decided 40 years ago they don't like opera. It's too late to try to bring them to the mission now. While younger donors may not have the depth of pockets that older donors have, if you can capture donors at a younger age, they're much more likely to stick with you, especially as their income grows. So 5 years when I began having these conversations with clients, we were focused on millennials. And many organizations said, oh, millennials have no money. In 2020, the average millennial household income was $71,566. This year, that average household income is $97,860, about a 35% increase. How many of us have had 30 to 35% increases in fundraising? Those donors who have been cultivated well by organizations are now in a position to give more. We're also advising our clients, now is the time to focus on cultivating and communicating your missions to Gen Z. Gen Z households currently have an average income of $45,000. There's an article on NPR this morning that Gen Z is actually the wealthiest generation of 20-somethings in history, although they have an extreme sense of financial insecurity. If you want to communicate with Gen Z, YouTube is their number one social platform. 78% of Gen Z identify that they're on YouTube, followed by Instagram coming in at 76%. If your social media strategy focuses strictly on Facebook and, God forbid, X, you need to, if you want to get to this generation, you need to have a social media and communication strategy that focuses on a minimum YouTube and Instagram. I personally, I have less strong feelings about TikTok and Snapchat because those are much more instantaneous and transactional messaging. They're not good for long-term messaging or long-form messaging. Okay, let's talk about institutional donors. Institutional donors, in particular foundations, give to address society issues. They have to give a portion of their corpus away. These were typically initially established by individuals, families, or corporations to make grants for charitable purposes. For their IRS classification, they are required to make a minimum payout to organizations. The cultivation strategy for institutional donors, in particular foundations, is a data-driven, project-based proposal. There are very few foundations that give to operations. I only know of one in Georgia. The three things that are impacting foundations right now that come to this. First of all, foundations are also 501c3s. Giving officers within foundations have to explain the results they got for their gifts to their own boards of directors. We all have dealt with grant foundations that have grants that have pretty significant reporting requirements. Foundations that we have talked to are actually emphasizing the value of those reports more. That because of the competition for new donors, foundations that do not, grant recipients who do not do a good job of providing impact data to foundations are probably going to find themselves with longer sit-out periods or not invited to reapply. Second, foundations are concerned about a number of the tax implications in the current budget package in Washington. The third thing that's impacting foundations is specifically donor-advised funds. Community foundations and other organizations that manage donor-advised funds um, do a great job, but donor-advised funds can also be managed by organizations like Fidelity or Vanguard. More and more large dollar donors are relying on donor advised funds. Many of them don't understand the key word is advised, not donor directed funds. So if Brittany Spillman, is incredibly wealthy and decides to set up the Brittany Spillman Fund at the, Gadsden, Community Foundation, and goes and says she will get a tax discount or a tax write-off for the $1 million that she gives the community foundation to set up that fund. If she says to the community foundation, I want you to give much of that money to Kylie Spears' organization at Meredith's Place, by and large, the community foundation is going to say, yes, we're going to do that. Organizations that are run by Fidelity, by Vanguard, et cetera, in part get compensated by the amount of money that they have under management. So while Brittany may say, I want you to give X number of dollars to Kylie Spears' organization, practically speaking, if Fidelity is managing that fund, they say, okay, we'll take that under advisement. And they'll probably give money to the organization, but they will not necessarily give money in the amount that Brittany wanted or intended. The foundations, the donor advised funds that are run by organizations like Fidelity and Vanguard and Merrill Lynch and so forth, really hope Wall Street doesn't catch on to that because it pushes up. They're going to at some point or another, but it means that more major gifts are getting harder to get because wealthy donors have put donor advised funds between their pocketbooks and the nonprofits they support. Our goal within these are non-recurrent restricted gifts. They will always be restricted gifts, even though we hope they wouldn't, almost always. There are a few operation funding foundations out there. The time to fund them is 12 to 24 months, and the difficulty of that is high. I usually put this in front of boards of directors because there is at least somebody on a board of directors who believes that foundations are like ATMs. You go up and you swipe your grant application, and they give you a big wad of cash. I like them to understand that that is actually not the case. Grant funding is some of the most difficult funding for nonprofits to achieve. Let's talk about the other side of that, corporate giving. Corporate philanthropy is primarily a form of advertising. Corporations donate to charity for a mix of reasons, tax benefits, enhanced brand reputation, sometimes employee engagement, and sometimes a desire to positively impact the community. While they can improve public relations, mostly organizations really give to nonprofits to help drive up their perception, in particular in front of their customers. When I retired from Delta, I went to work at the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, and I had lunch with the previous chief marketing officer, and he told me one day at lunch, Delta should give us more. At the time, Delta was giving about $1 million to the organization. I said, okay, I'll bite. Why should Delta give us more? He said, well, it's because we're the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. We've won 34 Grammys. And that meant nothing to Delta. When I became chief marketing officer, I went through and quantified who our audience was. At the time, the orchestra's audience was the typical orchestra patron was a 54-year-old college educated female. 75% of them had a bachelor's degree, 40% of them had an advanced degree. The average household income was $154 $100,000. They had two children that are both grown, and they spent 30% or more of their discretionary income on travel. Having that data to put in front of Delta and say, these are the patrons who you are not getting in front of, and saying, for $1 million, I can put your name on this set of concerts and give you value to those customers. That quantifiable, data-driven brand impact proposal paid off, and they gave us $1 million. They didn't give it to us because I was there. They were actually not terribly happy I was there, but they gave it to us because they could see the audience that we would get. Now, this is difficult to put together. Cultivation timeline of corporations can take 12 to 24 months. You really have to have a message for a corporation of how their brand is going to benefit from being associated with your organization. And one of the most important things to pay attention to is the organization's fiscal year. So within Georgia, the vast majority of our corporations are on a January 1 fiscal year. That means that those organizations will start working on their budgets in September. They'll start putting their budgets together in September with the goal of having them completed at the end of October and approved by their boards of directors in November for the coming fiscal year. If they're going to start working on their budget in September, that is not the time to start cultivating that corporation. You need to start cultivating the corporation in the springtime. That people go on vacation in the summer. It's hard to get meetings. It's harder to get attention in June, July, and August. Kids are going back to school. The best time to fundraise with corporations is March through May, because that's when their foundations and their advertising departments are starting to take notes. They've got time to take meetings, and you'll have a better chance of selling them and being one of their budgetary priorities in September, as opposed to waiting until autumn to do it. If you've missed that window, then now's the time to start cultivating those corporations for 2027 gifts. The gift goals are recurrent gifts that restricted and unrestricted. Difficulty of this is extremely high because you have to build a data-driven case of why an organization wants to give money to your nonprofit that explains how they're in some way going to benefit. Now let's touch on earned revenue, because even though our company is called our fundraising search, we also place a strong emphasis on helping our clients build earned revenue operations. Every nonprofit must have some core related good or service that can be monetized. So when I ran a statewide nonprofit vision and hearing NGO, we sold glasses cases. We sold vanity frames. We had other things that that were related products to what we did. It was not a huge portion of our revenue, but it is anything that is ancillary is a good thing. Some organizations look at earned revenue as bad or as a distraction. In the market that we're in right now, most nonprofits cannot afford the luxury of believing that there is such a thing as bad revenue if it's legal. I'm not advocating, drug trafficking or smuggling, but I am advocating related businesses that you can add to your organization in order to drive ancillary revenue. Some organizations will say, oh, but we risk losing our IRS tax-free status. That's an excuse. I know of no nonprofit who has ever lost its IRS tax-free status because of earned revenue. You would have to be consistently generating more than 50% of total revenue from profitable activities. Most nonprofits can not get anywhere close to that number. This can be difficult, but it really depends on the individual nonprofit and whether or not there is somebody in your organization who has as an entrepreneurial spirit to help lead this. Okay, before we talk about actually some of the leadership elements of this, let me pause here. Are there any questions on any of the notes on diversification strategies? And am I being helpful? I hope I'm being helpful.
Very helpful. Again, you are welcome to unmute or to type any questions or comments in the chat.
Thanks, Suzanne. Okay, well, if there's no questions, I'll assume I'm doing a really good job and I'll keep going. Oh, if we're a small organization, where should we start? I know the answer is it depends, but um, Debbie, where you should start, I would advise you, first off, I would do a development assessment. If you know that the revenue mix should be 70% from individuals, 20% from foundations, and the rest from other, how do you stand? Where do you have, so I'll use one nonprofit I work with as an example. Um, they get 60% of their revenue from individual, but overwhelmingly, it all comes from two events. Event-based revenue is the most work for the lowest return on investment, and event donors are essentially very weak donors. So with that organization, we spend a lot of time emphasizing building an individual giving program that really gives them long-term mileage with people who are passionate about the mission. Um, so the where I would tell you to start is first off is a really good development assessment of where you're getting your cash, where are your strengths and weaknesses, and then what do you want to try to do first. Don't try to do everything first. And feel free to reach out to me. That I will give anybody for an hour for free to talk to them about how to approach their organization's unique circumstances. In my when you get my slides, my contact information will be at the very end. And thanks for the question. Okay, let's talk about a little bit about leadership. I always like to put this in everything I do, in particular because, as I told you, I'm a college professor. I teach leadership strategy and management at Georgia State University. I have a passion for teaching leadership because I have seen how much damage bad management and bad leadership can do to an organization over the course of my career. One of the things I think is important for us to own in nonprofit is many times people get to the executive director or the CEO role, not necessarily because they want the job or not necessarily because they've got the leadership skills for the job, but because they're best at the mission. That when nonprofit as a sector has a tendency to over prioritize technical proficiency. When I was working in performing arts, I was told I was never going to run an orchestra because I'm not a musician. I was never going to run a theater company because I was not a director. I was never going to run a social services organization because I wasn't a social worker. For-profit companies got over that almost 100 years ago. Doctors don't run hospitals. Pilots don't run airlines. Lawyers, if they're honest with themselves, don't really run their law firms. Leadership is its own set of knowledge, skills, and abilities. And all of us who lead nonprofits, having been a CEO of both for-profit companies and nonprofit companies, I will tell you being the CEO of a nonprofit company is harder. It's harder because we have fewer resources, which means we have to be more creative. Our performance goals are less clear, and the standards for board service are lower. So there are more things that we have to compensate for. Those of you who are executive directors, just by being on this call, you're already doing better than a lot of executive directors in nonprofits because you're seeking out the information to be better at your job. I want to talk about the mindset of the leader or the executive director first before we get into how you manage through this. So you've got to manage yourself through this change before you manage others through it. The starting point is accepting the emotions. Acknowledge and accept the emotions and feelings that you have. If you've ever heard somebody say to an employee, I don't care what's going on in your personal life, leave your moods and emotions at home. That's like telling an employee to leave their pancreas at home. Practically speaking, they can't do that. Moods and emotions are a survival mechanism for us as a species. You need to actually pause, take a breath, know and acknowledge what you're feeling and understanding your own emotional and mental mindset so you can help move yourself forward, but then so you can help others move forward. The second part of managing yourself through this is focusing on what you can control. Identify the things where you have agency, the things where you can take action, and the boundaries where you can provide a sense of stability for you and your organization. If you can't control it, have a plan to deal with it. That's what contingency planning is for. But do not, I run a nonprofit consulting firm, and I teach at the university level in Georgia. Do I have emotions and feelings about what's going on in Los Angeles? Absolutely. Is there anything practically speaking I can do about it from right here? No. So it's not going to occupy, I'm not going to allow it to occupy a large portion of my day. Third, and this is critical, this is what you're doing right now. This is what the Carey Center is so good at. Gather information. Actively seek out details, understand context for change, try to get clarity even when clarity is not available. And one of the things that I tell new executive directors and CEOs that I learned on the job, no one tells you how lonely the job is. That old saying it's lonely at the top is accurate. Reaching out to others who are experiencing similar things, who may have perspective, may have ideas, is healthy. And people in your organization are not going to necessarily understand what you're going through like your peers will understand it. Fourth, you need to develop adaptability because your organization has to develop adaptability. You have to embrace flexibility. You have to be able to adjust your plans and strategies as new information emerges. It's what many organizations had to learn during the pandemic. You need to dust those skills off because the next 3 years look to be exactly as demanding in terms of flexibility and adaptability as the pandemic was. And then you need to focus on your own resilience so you can focus on your organization's resilience. What are your coping mechanisms to manage stress, to navigate difficult emotions during these periods of upheaval? I will tell you one of the things I discovered about myself during the pandemic that I leverage now is how much being outside helps me cope. To be perfectly honest, if I never see the inside of a conference room again, I'll be just fine. But being outside helps me cope, helps me manage stress. And so I take client meetings outside. The client calls me and says, hey, I want to bounce something off of you, or I want to, get your opinion on something. I'm like, great, meet me and let's go walk in the park. The things that help you manage your stress can be leveraged to also help make you more effective, but also help you make your organization more effective. Turning our attention to manage your team through change, once you manage yourself through this, starting point is to set realistic goals. This is not the time to set stretch goals. You need to break down, you've got enough challenges as it is. You need to break these challenges down into smaller, achievable goals and steps to manage your team, especially to make sure that the team does not feel overwhelmed. People are much more likely to buy into goals that they feel are realistic, achievable, and that they had a say in helping to set. In fact, if employees are involved in helping to set goals, they will usually sign up for goals that are more aggressive than the manager thinks they might otherwise. This is a time to communicate openly. You need to have transparent conversations with your colleagues, with the people in the organization, even with your loved ones. If they ask, what are you concerned about? Own it. The idea of the strong, emotionless leader is not effective in times like this. Human beings manage most effectively in situations like this. Identify who your support networks are, both for individual and for the organization, and then lean on them. Lean on your friends and donors, lean on your professional advisors, people that you meet through the Carey Center, that who can provide instrumental support, but also can provide you with perspectives, best practices, and ideas. Recognize when your organization has a need for new skills and then work to develop those new skills. Every organization has a different levels of knowledge and expertise that they need to find. train or get the training that you need from them. Reframe the perspective. You know, a lot of organizations who are coming off success and have concerns about the future don't like to talk about those concerns. Um, Yet in every tragedy, there's also opportunity. The pandemic was horrible. Zoom made a great business out of it. Uber Eats made a great business opportunity out of it. Um, don't look at what is happening as tragedy. In every tragedy, there is also opportunity. Train yourself and your organization to look for those opportunities. And then remember, in nonprofit, focus on the purpose and the mission. That we aspire to have a better and bigger impact in the world than just making money. And I think the last thought I'm going to leave you in this on in terms of leadership is first off, remember, no one works in nonprofit because it's easy. No one gets into nonprofit because it's the smart thing to do. We get into nonprofit because we are motivated by having a better impact, because we are used to working in and leading organizations that don't have enough resources that require us to be more nimble. Those of us in nonprofit are probably better prepared to navigate an uncertain environment than for-profit professionals. So with that, we're going to send this out. Two things that you'll have the QR code will take you to my contact. We wrote a book on fundraising that is for new executive leaders and for boards. You'll also have a QR code for that. So with that, I've stopped screen sharing. Um, Questions, comments, anything that you'd like me to elaborate on?
I have a question. You talked
Yeah,
about
Julie.
fundraising coalitions. Can you talk more about like how you would start to build those and how many do you think an organization should focus on?
Start with one
Okay.
and look at what you think can be most effective. I will tell you a model in a specific organization or a coalition that I have worked with personally that I view as the most effective coalition in the world is an organization called the Georgia Water Coalition. Years ago, there's about 400 nonprofits in Georgia that some way or another touch clean water. And years ago, the only foundation in Georgia that would fund clean water work was called the Sapelo Foundation. The woman who ran the Sapelo Foundation, Phyllis Bowen, called all of the nonprofits who touched water to a conference in Georgia, in Atlanta, and said, "Here's my problem. I don't have enough money to fund all 400 of you." So either I tried to fund all 400 of you inadequately, which doesn't fit our mission, or I've tried to pick and choose who the right ones are to fund, which requires me to build an expertise in-house that I don't have and can't afford. So she said, "I'm pushing the problem back on you." And the Georgia Water Coalition was formed to do two things: fundraise and advocate and lobby. So from a fundraising perspective, the Georgia Water Coalition has a group of funders that it works with. And every year, the leadership council of the organization picks the activities that they're going to work on, takes that to the foundations. They have foundations fund them, and then individual organizations within the coalition act as fiduciary agent, and they ensure that the work gets done and the reports get made. The coalition itself is not a 501c3. It is not even a organization, which means there's no one at the table, but it's an example of organizations working together. Another one I will strongly advocate that you look at, especially for organizations that are trying to get state funding, is the Georgia Charitable Care Network. And the Charitable Care Network, there is an Alabama Charitable Care Network too. I don't know what its name is, but they are coalitions of free and charitable clinics that work together to get state appropriations. And the charitable care networks act as re-grantors. Because what they do is they try to make it easy for an organization to give money to companies in a cause. And that's your goal with a coalition, is to try to make it easy for the foundation to fund something that is impactful. Are there other questions? No problem, Julie. Thanks for the question. It's a great question. I love that question.
Debbie has
I'm,
a
I'm
question in the chat. She says the larger group we belong to is in slight turmoil, and some volunteers want to pivot in the face of these turbulent times. How would leadership hold the conversation about focus of our original mission versus pivoting?
It's a great question, Debbie. And the starting point is, how strong do you feel your strategic plan is? That, one of the things we help organizations do their strategic plan. A lot of organizations have strategic plans that don't have contingency plans. They build their strategic plan from the best of all possible scenarios. If your organization is one of those, then you need to do some contingency planning immediately. In the appendix of the slides that Brittany's going to send out is a whole section on how to do contingency planning. To start with the question of do you pivot or not, really goes with how strong do you feel you are, how strongly positioned are you to maintain or pursue the original mission versus pivoting. Without data, the answer to that question is just an opinion. And so contingency planning helps you determine whether or not you can keep to your original mission, or do you need to pivot. Brittany, how are we doing on time?
We are right there. If you have any other questions, like Dave has already said, you will have his contact information in the emails that I send you tomorrow. And like he said, he is more than happy to speak with you and provide some guidance. So, Dave, I just want to say thank you for a wonderful program today. Everyone, you'll be
Thank you.
getting an email from me tomorrow with a link to today's presentation and recording, a short 3-question survey, and an opportunity to sign up to be a Carey Center nonprofit affiliate. The Carey Center Nonprofit Affiliate Program currently serves over 425 nonprofits in Alabama and beyond and offers educational programming, professional development, and networking opportunities to nonprofit professionals. Carey Center nonprofit affiliates are the first to learn about upcoming programming, and membership is free. We are excited to announce that we are offering the Carey Center Nonprofit Professional Certificate. This is an online, non-degreed certificate and offered through a partnership with the Auburn University Office of Professional and Continuing Education and Merit Nonprofit Professional Development, and provides a tailored curriculum for nonprofit professionals. Merit is an anytime, anywhere micro-learning platform that builds 6 core nonprofit proficiency areas, including leading, learning, resource generating, planning, managing, and overseeing through 28 learning paths. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you at one of our virtual programs or in person for our nonprofit training series, Traveling the State. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Brittany.
Thank you.